Hey, Wargamers, welcome back to the channel, Death from Above Wargaming. I'm Aaron,
And I'm Kevin.
and Kevin is in a sweet cockpit. We are back
It's
with
like a Age of War mech here, powered down in standby mode.
love it. What planet are you on right now? I'm not even sure.
The backcountry of Harlock, I'm sure. Some spider's gonna jump on my window in a moment.
So, guys, tonight we are here to talk about the much-awaited Alpha Strike campaign. We've been putting the finishing touches on that. We had a couple of you guys take an early peek at that and provide some very valuable feedback. So thank you to those of you that participated in that. So tonight we're going to step through all of the rules in the PDF that is now available for download on our website at www.dfawargaming.com. And just go into the download sections into the Alpha Strike campaign area there, and you will be able to download these rules free of charge. So, Kevin, are you ready? So, I got the PDF up here, and first and foremost, I guess we should say that this is in fact based on Catalyst Game Labs' Chaos campaign. Now, as far as I am aware, I don't think the Chaos campaign is written to interface at all with Alpha Strike. I mean, I guess you could adapt it,
Which we did.
Which we did. Fair point. So we basically took the classic adaptation and we ported it over to Alpha Strike. It's very similar. If you've played with our classic BattleTech campaign rules, you'll be very familiar with these rules. That they are very similar, but there are some notable differences. Of course, Alpha Strike being a great platform for combined arms. So of course all that's in there. Very cool stuff. So Kevin.
Yeah. And I feel like that might be one of the most significant changes from the classic BattleTech version that we put out there. Otherwise, I think we preserved a lot of the type of house rules or major themes that we brought to that one.
Right. I would agree with all of that. Okay. So let's talk about campaign setup. So very similar. Basically, the first thing we're going to do is pick a location and the factions, right? Who's playing? Where are they playing? We always like to have a narrative element to our campaigns. Yeah. You don't need to, but I think it just brings so much more to the table when you have a story behind it. That is a big part of the BattleTech universe. So that is, in fact, step one. Step two, skill thresholds. So one of the things that you'll find in Alpha Strike is with point value, you can take a very powerful mech with a very low skill value and field it for a very reasonable sum, or you can take a very inexpensive mech, give it a very high skill value, and it becomes extremely lethal. And so, in order to sort of bound how crazy you want your game to be, you should set an upper and lower sort of control limit, if you will, for skill. Kevin, we typically do anywhere between 2 and 5. We have a limited number of skill 2 pilots, maybe one for like the whole company, and then maybe like if, for example, if you have troop transports or like the medevac VTOL, for example, I typically will slap that with a skill 5. Because it doesn't have any guns anyway, so you might as well save a couple of points.
Yeah.
But that's just typically how we play, yeah.
And I think that's the right way to do it. I think, just setting a maximum versus just saying you need to have X number of skill 2, X number of skill 3, and so on and so forth. Right. That way there's some diversity. You have the option of having a more green force facing off against veterans where you could offset that, PV with the mechs you bring to the table, the actual,
right.
Bigger forces. So I think just generally saying, at most you can have this number of skill level 2. At most you can have this number of skill level 3. And I think it just level sets any kind of cheese tactics you could bring to the table by really abusing sort of like the skill system with your mechs.
Right. Agreed. The other thing is, speaking of cheese tactics, is setting some unit type thresholds. So, what are the maximum number of units you want to bring? Now, some of you guys that have sort of early release playtest this have done just all mechs, which I think is really cool, and some of you have, just said no infantry. We don't want to do infantry, just, or no battle suits, no infantry. Whatever you want to do is perfectly fine. We find setting that up front does help with the balance because, we know we've seen it in some of our tactical reports that I put out, right? I mean, certain units are very brutal. Like you could just field a million Savannah Masters at skill 7 and they cost almost nothing, and you just drive them around the board and cap everything, and like who wants to play that game? There
Right.
are always ways to kind of get cheesy with it.
10
So
artillery pieces,
right.
all aerospace. So it's just to avoid some power gamer coming to the table with, their pocket tactics that are absurd.
Exactly. So what we typically do is we say 12 battle mechs, 8 vehicles, 2 aerospace, 4 infantry. That's what we do. 26, basically 26 models in your force. Now you guys can do whatever you want, but that's just our recommendation if you want to just kind of dive in without having to think about it.
Yeah,
So
I think
once,
especially around like succession wars too. Like as we get to the clan, we may lean more towards like mech on mech,
Mhm.
because those omnis are just going to eat up PV pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're
Um,
going to have a lot less on the
and you're going to want
force.
to have intersphere forces with probably a lot coming to the table to match up against that. So
It's true.
it'll be, I think it'll slightly vary as we get into more of the clan invasion, but
Right.
gotta have miniatures first.
That's right. October, I heard now, so we'll see. Fingers crossed. So the next thing is formation, special pilot abilities, special command abilities. What do you want to play? Formations are very cool. They can also be very game breaking if you have a novice player that doesn't know how to use them, or if you guys, find that certain combinations of mechs and formations or SPAs are just game breaking and you don't want to put them in. It's always good to kind of put that down up front so that as people are building their forces, they know what to expect. Now into sort of the nitty gritty, Kevin. The mission average point value. How big of a game do you want to play? So for this, we have this thing called APV, average point value. Very simple. This is the game you want. Like on average, how big do you want to play? You want to play a 500-point game? You want to play a 200-point game? Do you want to just do like a little 4-on-4 with 150 points? Like you name it, that's your average point value. That's sort of the cornerstone of the math that drives how big of a force you can bring to the basically in the campaign, right? So
Right.
for
And at
for
this
ours,
phase,
yeah.
right, to not overwhelm yourself thinking about how long this campaign is going to be, we're just basing it on one mission, right? On one matchup, what do you want that average point value to be? And there's going to be some mechanics down the road we're going to introduce that shows you how you can actually go higher or lower in different missions. It's sort of like a percent modifier.
Right.
But right now we're just setting that average to really let it set sort of like a groundwork for what type of forces you're going to be bringing, how big of a force you're going to bring.
And speaking of which, the total point value, the total force point value is calculated from that average point value. So essentially, the way this works is so in the example in the rules, like let's say Kevin and I agree to play with an APV of 235 points, right? So we agree that our average game is going to be about 235 points. And we set the expectation that we want to have the campaign last 3 games. Somebody should be able to win in a minimum of 3 games. Maybe it goes to 4 games, maybe it goes to 5, but if you sweep, you should be able to win in 3 games. We take that 235, we multiply that by 3, we get 705. Maybe we round it off and we say, all right, 700 a person. If you want to play a 10-game campaign, go for it. God bless. I mean, some people really like the protracted ones. We like to play them quick so we can get new mechs and new units and new forces. Some people really like the longer campaigns, so the formula holds true. You just multiply that average point value by the expected number of games, the minimum number of games you want to play, right, to win, right? So if one player sweeps, how many games would it take them to win? Multiply that, and then you get your force value. It's just that simple. That said, Kev, why don't we talk about picking our mechs?
Yeah, man. So, I mean, this is really where victory and defeat is decided early on, right? This is the most, this is where I pick at my, tactics and strategies for hours before I come to the table and ultimately fail at it. But, right, selecting your forces. So you have 26 units in our example. Your both sides are going to be picking their units, probably on their own in private, but at some point you put it out on the table, right? Before you ever play, here are the forces I'm bringing. Aaron's going to show me here are the forces I'm bringing. And
Mm-hmm.
with each of those units, you're going to assign skill values, right? What the pilot is for each, or the, whoever's controlling, whoever like the warrior is, or the skill level of the unit, in advance. And the idea behind that is that you can't change up those skill values on the fly just to squeeze or fit BV. I mean, there are a mechanic for replacing pilots down the road that we're going to talk about in the downtime section. But for the most part, right, your higher skilled pilots are going to be locked in on those units, and with options to replace them with more like green individuals later if you absolutely need to, or until they die. But the whole point is, having more of that realistic assignment of pilots to their different chassis.
Yep.
And obviously, whatever variant you choose is the variant you are sort of stuck with for the campaign. That's pretty much it. Once you've kind of got your list set and it's within the PV range, we both kind of just email them to each other. You bring them, you show them at the table beforehand, and you kind of work from there. But the whole idea is, right, you kind of want that good sportsmanship in it. You both kind of reveal it. You don't want one side to reveal and then the other guy goes back and starts to game his list according to that. So it's more about kind of you've kind of done your preparation. You both kind of get surprised in the moment with, this is what we're coming with. Going into a mission, I could bring any one of my 26, right?
Right.
So you don't necessarily know, but you kind of know what my options are. You've got some intel on what you're up against, but
Yeah.
that's really it. What you're going to meet out there on the field. So that's where we still kind of preserve that a
Yes.
little bit of that surprise. And with the unit concealment, there is still some,
Mm.
there are
Yes.
some surprises from time to time.
Yeah, if you haven't seen our latest Alpha Strike battle report, guys, where we introduced the visibility rules and the blip counters, that's really cool. You should check that out. I think that's it goes hand in hand with the campaign. It's a really great way to play, and to Kevin's point, to kind of keep some of that mystery until the bullets start flying. So the SP pool. So we talked a little bit about picking the forces. One of the things about the campaign itself is persistency. You lose a mech or a mech takes damage. Um, it costs something to repair that mech or to replace that mech, right? You have logistics or supply lines or whatever they might be. So we quantify that in terms of support points. This is something that was inspired from that Chaos campaign supplement that came out from Catalyst. So essentially, these support points, you can do a whole bunch of things with them. You can actually even hire mercenaries with them, which is pretty cool. So if you're short on certain units, you might have seen that if you watch the tactical report series I put out. But basically, all you do is you take your APV, your average point value for mission, and divide it by 2, and it's just that simple. So if you decide you want to do an APV of 250, you get 125 support points apiece. This is supposed to be tight. You guys can modify that number however you want. You can make it divide it by 4, divide it by 10, whatever you want. The less support points you have, the harder it will be to field functioning mechs and functioning units on the battle grid, right? Because as they take damage, they'll be harder to repair. So if you like that kind of game where you have damaged mechs limping around with bad fire control and legs half blown off, which is fun, then less support points is for you. If you don't want that and you just want to be able to kind of wave a magic wand and repair everything up into the bitter end, then more support points, or just do away with it entirely. But we find, dividing it by 2 is that nice healthy balance of, again, you're pretty good in the beginning, but it gets pretty real once you get into game 3, game 4. So
yeah, and I think the major deviation we took from the Chaos campaign is we're just giving a pool up front, right? You
right.
know what you start with, and you can kind of manage your economy. You figure you're probably going into a mission with a certain amount of logistical support that you're aware of. So rather than being award based, that way if you're having a lucky run against me, you're not going to sweep me. I don't feel like the despair of why do I have to continue this campaign when
Right.
you just have all the support and I have all these busted mechs.
Right.
It gives, both sides equal opportunity to sort of repair, adjust, reformulate their squad and come back, hopefully, and rebound. So it actually creates, I think, more competitiveness over the long term of the campaign. So it's pretty cool, I think, the way we do it that way.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great point. Right, because there is definitely always an opportunity to get back in the fight, right? And we'll talk a little bit about again some of the mech buys and the mercenary hires and things like that in a little bit. The next section in the PDF is really the basics, right? The tracks, the missions, who's the attacker, who's the defender, escalation level, all of these things. So what we've done is we've sort of taken the notion of tracks right from the Chaos campaign, but we've abstracted away the notion of missions and made those their own thing in their own right. So when you're in a specific track, so for example, the contact track, you're presented with multiple missions to select, right? And as we at DFA release new missions, you can add those in. You can pick from them, right? We just released a mission pack not that long ago, and this has been updated so that all of those missions are available. Now, how does it work? Well, basically, the ebb and flow of the tracks, which if you're looking at the PDF now, I'll flash up an image here. You can see as the blue line representing the defender, the red line representing the attacker. Now, the attacker, who's the attacker? Well, you decide that. That's based on the narrative, right? And if you guys want to roll off for it before you decide on the narrative, that's great. Do that. We kind of wing it. One time Kevin's attacker, next time maybe Tom will be. We rotate around. Whoever the attacker is, and however you want to decide that, the attacker always picks the first mission within that contact track. So if you look at the missions by track, which is on page 4, you'll see contact track. You get 4 missions to pick from: recon, intercept, seize ground, and battle lines, right? And each of those missions has a different low, moderate, high escalation. We'll talk about escalation in a minute. So the attacker would pick a mission, and that would be the first thing that happens. Now, the attacker is, again, if the attacker wins, you go to breakthrough. If they win again, you go to assault. They win again, you go to victory. Now, if you guys are playing more than a 3-game sweep, you can just stay on the assault track, and you just kind of keep looping around until you get to victory, right? However you want to manage that. This track flow, based on the Chaos campaign, was basically built around if you win 3 in a row, there's no way the defender or attacker's coming back, right? So that said, that's basically how that works. Now, when you get into a specific mission, the only other thing I wanted to say, Kevin, is that if you're the defender and I'm the attacker, right, from a narrative perspective, and you win the first mission as the defender, we go to the pursuit track. You get to pick a mission. In that pursuit mission, we juxtapose, you become the attacker, right? Now, in the narrative, you're still the one attacking. I'm still the one attacking the planet, right? And you're still the one defending the planet. But in that mission, you're the attacker, right? So when we read the rules for the mission, it says attacker does this, defender does this, right? You play it that way. And the rules sort of talk about that, force A, force B, who's who, and it's sort of articulated very clearly, broken down, I think, pretty well. But that's an important point.
Yeah, and I think it's we could have possibly used different language, but with our missions, it's easier to have an attacker and defender as sort of the two opposing sides in the way we construct our rules.
Right.
And really, right, like you're saying, within the construct of the mission tracks, the attacker is really the one with the momentum. So it could be the defender in the overall narrative of the campaign, someone defending the planet or defending a base, whatever. Or really, you might not have any attackers. It might just be 2 people facing off. But really, it's the attacker's the one with the momentum. They won the previous match, and they sort of have that pressing the next advantage.
Yeah, well said. And so, when Kevin and I are battling over Star League caches, right, there is no attacker. Only losers. So the next important thing here, we touched on this a couple times, is the mission escalation level. So one of the cool things, this was actually one of your brainchildren, I should say, is each mission has a low, moderate, or high escalation. I believe the only one that doesn't have all three is recon. Some of them just don't make sense. Like you wouldn't recon a planet with 4 atlases unless you were House Steiner. So,
there are exceptions.
but most missions have a low, moderate, and high escalation, and that will affect various things within the mission. First and foremost, it's going to affect your APV. That's your average point value for the mission. So, for example, if we're playing, let's say, take and hold at high escalation, that's an APV of 1.2 modifier, right? So that means I take whatever my APV is and I multiply it by 1.2. So if my APV, let's say we're playing, we decide 200 and let's just say 200 points. It makes my math easy, right? Then that means instead for that mission, you're going to be playing 240 points, right? I think I did that math right. So that's kind of how the APV works. That's very important. And when you pick the escalation level, there are other things that may get tweaked, like in Seek and Destroy, the construction factor of the buildings you need to take out, it goes up, right? Because you got bigger mechs on the table, things like that. So that's basically the nuts and bolts of mission escalation level. And then the next thing, is you get the mission point value, and we just talked about that. So the take and hold example, boom. So we're at 240 points, and now you're ready to do my favorite thing, which is decide out of your pool of campaign forces which mechs are going to get on the table, right?
Yeah.
Or
and
units.
I think this is where it's important to have that momentum factor, right? As the attacker, right, the one who either started off the campaign attacking, or now you've won the last match and you're the attacker. You get to choose what mission within that track stop location you want to pick. So you may have only 4 or 5 to pick from, and we try to thematically line them up with that counterattack or whatever it is. It's a contact or an assault. But you may choose the mission that better suits your forces or your play style. And similarly, you have the option of choosing that escalation level. So if I know all of my heavies are banged up, I may want to choose a lighter escalation level, knowing I can bring my lights to the table. So this is really where the attacker's advantage comes into play, is both in the mission selection and in the escalation level, that doesn't force the other person to go too far out of their comfort zone. Based on all the other factors we brought with average point value and things, they should have a fieldable force or close to a fieldable force, but really you can push what you feel is going to give you that tactical advantage going in the next fight. And oftentimes it does, or sometimes it totally backfires on you. And I think it's one of the interesting things. That's part of the interesting meta with our campaign system.
Right. I think it has a lot of narrative appeal too. If you figure that you've depleted all of your opponent's light mechs, and you want to play like a Seek and Destroy, but you're playing a very low escalation, you conduct this lightning raid. Maybe they can't deploy their big mechs fast enough to get there, and so he's left with either less mechs or less units on the field, or it just has to field some infantry and battle suits to hold you up because he can't fit anything in the point value. So that makes it kind of fun. In that regard too, and you can kind of sort of build that narrative up around this whole thing. So anyway, let's talk about the missions themselves, shall we? And the first thing is, we should talk about is objectives and objective points. So all of our missions have objectives. There is one mission called Pitched Battle, where the objective is blow up the other guy's mechs. But all of the other missions are really about challenging your opponent to gain control of or destroy a set of objectives. So if your opponent, for example, there are symmetrical missions where you and your opponent have basically the same objectives. You're both going for the same thing. And then there's asymmetrical missions, which I'll add a point of note on those in just a moment. But the asymmetrical missions, like Escort, where the defending player has to guide a small convoy across the board, or Seek and Destroy, where there are a set of buildings and a team has to move in, and destroy those buildings and get out, right? So some really exciting stuff. And again, if you guys are familiar with our missions, even with Classic, they're very similar in Alpha Strike. The only thing I will note is the asymmetrical missions that have destroyables, like Escort and Seek and Destroy, were balanced for our DFA size recommendations, right? So typically you're looking at like 8 units, maybe 10 units on the table. If you're going to be fielding 500 points as your average point value, don't be surprised when all the buildings disintegrate on turn 1 and seek and destroy. So you guys are going to have to do a little bit of adjustment, and you can always email us. We'll be happy to kind of help with that. But if you figure our APV around 230, and you can just kind of dial it up from there. If you're doing 500, multiply all the damage, all the construction factor by 2, because you figure you're feeling twice as many units, right? So just a point of note on that, a little bit of a tangent, but.
Yeah, and even with pitch battle, right? And because of what you just mentioned, right? All of victory and loss is determined on these objective points, right? They are essentially the economy of winning and losing with the objectives, whether it be destroying your enemy or taking ground or taking down a building, whatever, right? The objective points and the margin of victory within those objective points really determines the point system for winning and losing the campaign, not only that match, but the campaign.
Moving forward, margin of victory. So this is from like the old school, and I think it might be in Total Warfare, but like the old school 3rd edition, right? They had like, you'd have a minor victory, a major victory, minor defeat, major defeat, a draw, right? So we have minor victory, major victory, and draw. So what does that mean? Well, each mission specifies what qualifies you for either one of those major, minor, or draws, right? Usually a draw is you have the same number of points. Great. But in the context of the campaign, winning a mission minorly gives you 1 victory point for the campaign. A major victory gives you 2 victory points for the campaign. So, going for that major victory or that minor victory, or just battling for the draw so that you don't give your opponent any points, right? This all factors into the overall who's going to win the campaign, because victory points is basically that's it. That's the end all be all. That's the score on the scoreboard at the end of the day. You could totally trash your opponent and get a major victory, but then if they turn around and get 3 minor victories back to back to back, they're likely going to win that campaign, right? So this is the currency that you win by, right? These are the points that you score. The objective points are sort of, think about them as existing only within the instance of that mission. The victory points are the things that stay on the scoreboard throughout the whole campaign. Let's talk about what happens in a mission. So the first thing is what we call our drop deck, right? Our drop declarations. What are you bringing? So we figure out what's the PV for the mission, right? We hit it with that modifier based on the mission and the escalation we get. And then we decide what we're bringing. I'm like, all right, I'm going to bring, 2 locusts, a hunchback, a merlin, 2 goblins, and a couple of warrior helicopters. Bam, that's my drop deck. We basically bring it to the table, and that's what it is. Whether you're playing with weather and hidden units and all this other stuff that we play with, you still have to declare your forces, because there's no game master, right? You just got to say, this is what I'm bringing to the table. You can field damaged units as long as they can, so we also in this campaign, we highly recommend playing with forced withdrawal rules, which are very simple in Alpha Strike. I think it's mandatory. So as long as the unit isn't automatically going to be in forced withdrawal as soon as you deploy it, you can certainly field a damaged unit. So if you don't have enough support points to repair, your Banshee and it's got half its armor peeled off, it's the end of the game. You got to do what you got to do. Put it on the table. It's fine. It's perfectly fine. You just pay they just use their full adjusted point value, based on the pilot, the skill level, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and it's important. I think we'll probably cover it as we get into the support points. But when you do repair, your unit may have to sit out, right, if they're doing internal structure repair. So sometimes you may decide, I really need this unit. It may have just one like arm section that's bleeding internally. So you may want to just field it anyway for the next battle. So you kind of have to think ahead. Do I really want to repair now and waste time in the bay, or just field it, right? Patch it up, put some armor over top of the air and go.
Some crazy glue and go. So that is basically the drop deck. So the next thing that happens is you select the home edge. The mission defender always selects their home edge. So remember, this is not the campaign, the narrative, the person defending in the narrative perspective, but this is the person defending in the mission. This is the person that did not pick the mission, right? They picked their home edge first. Whatever So we play on a 48 by 48 battle grid. So every side it's open game. You pick defender picks any of the 4 sides. That's their home, unless otherwise stated. Right? Sometimes you pick a corner, like in area denial, you would pick a corner. But either way, they basically pick their edge or their corner. The attacker is opposite. Unless there's some other missions in the future where there's alternate deployment. But basically, the defender picks and the attacker has to go wherever they are supposed to go, typically opposite the defender. So
yeah, I think that offsets some of the advantage you get as an attacker, being able to choose both the mission, the escalation level. It just fits thematically as well, right? The defender, in most cases, it's their ground, it's their area that's being defended. They're
yeah,
probably going to have the first, take on their territory or wherever their base is. So
right.
it provides a little bit of leeway to make your comeback as a defender.
Yeah. And the only other thing I'll say on this is, in Alpha Strike, it talks about how to set up the map, right? And there are a lot of different variations where players take turns placing terrain, things like that. These are one of those things you guys should decide up front. You might decide that the defender gets to set up the map and pick their home edge. That makes it simple. At DFA, we just kind of, I sort of impartially set it up, or we have a third, Tom or whoever will set it up. But if you guys are, I think fairly honest players, you can pretty much set up an impartial map.
36 inches of woods.
Right. Alternatively, you might say, well, the attacker has to set up the map because they don't know what edge the defender's going to pick. So then they're more incentivized to set up an impartial map. However you want to do it, it's perfectly fine. But once the map's set up, the defender picks their home edge, engage, as the legendary captain, what's his name, used to say. Picard. How did I forget that, Kevin? How did I forget it?
So many captains.
So basically, you begin the mission, and in Alpha Strike, remember, you deploy basically by moving onto the map from the map edge, and that's it. And you just play the mission, you track the objective points, and that's that. A couple of things we talked about, force withdrawal, retreating. Let's talk about those, right? So retreating.
No one wants to do it, but sometimes it's required. So obviously with the force withdrawal rules, right, there's set conditions, criteria for when a unit has to start withdrawing from the field.
Mm-hmm.
But we do, there are cases where a voluntary retreat makes sense, because this is more, you're playing the long game, whether it be a close match or you have the advantage, you don't want to deplete your forces. So if one of your units is in bad shape, or that this match is totally out of your hands and you don't want to suffer any more damage needlessly, retreating is a really good option to sort of, give the opponent the victory now, but you're sort of saving your forces for later. I don't recall what is the rule for how we decide when they retreat the victory points, because it's not the victory
Right.
points in that moment, right? We had a system for how we calculate the victory points going
Right.
from that point out. But our rules on retreating, right, there are specific rules in there where, as long as the distance, once you want to retreat, you sort of make a declaration at the end of your movement phase that I am retreating the field, or at least this unit's retreating the field. When that unit gets to a point that they are closer to their home edge, your original home edge, than their closest enemy. So if I'm 10 inches from the home edge and the closest enemy is 12 inches, at the end of the phase, it can be removed from play. It's sort of our fair play retreat, where it's just assumed that fast forward, that unit makes it off. No one's firing on it. But the rule is that unit, once it makes that declaration, it also can't attack back. So it can't try to make any attacks of its own. It has to continue retreating. It can't decide to change its mind at some point. It's sort of in a retreat mode for the remainder of the match.
The only restrictions on retreating are two things. The unit has to have more than 0 inches of movement, and the unit can't be immobilized by some other effect. That's about it. As long as the unit can move, right, and it's got that distance that you talked about, they're good to go.
Right. And otherwise, those two effects will typically lead to critical damage right? Or crippling damage, I mean, which is going to put you in forced withdrawal and possibly an ejection anyway. So really, it's to avoid you from um, trying to circumvent, right,
Right.
those conditions, which are a little bit more severe as far as our
Exactly.
rules.
Right. So force withdrawal, real simple. So this is from the Alpha Strike Commander's Edition that I've got over here. And basically, there's a couple of things, right? So what puts you in force withdrawal? There's no armor remaining, and you have 50% of your structure remaining rounded up. So what does this mean? This is actually pretty brutal. So if you have 3 pips of structure, your armor is gone, and you take one pip, right? You're in force withdrawal because you have only half of your structure, 1.5, rounded up to 2 remaining. That's an important thing. If you only have 1 point of structure, like you're, not remaining, but it's like a Savannah Master, it's just a 1/1. You take out the armor, it's in force withdrawal. Medium and long range damage are both reduced to 0. Also, they can't start the game with 0 damage. So if the unit only has a short range damage, that particular bullet does not apply. The other thing is the DFA system does not consider being a mobile through damage critical and or motive hit substantial enough to trigger force withdrawal. So it's possible, and think about this in the classic BattleTech sense, like you could have your legs blown off and be completely undamaged, or if you're a vehicle, have your tracks blown off, but you're a Shrek and you've got 3 PPCs. Your crew's not going to abandon quite yet, right? You've got a turret, you can shoot. So we thought that was not necessarily in and of itself enough to put the mech, the tank, whatever, into force withdrawal. Anything that like flies is typically going to crash anyway, so they're so they're pretty much done. But there's that. But the downside, as we talked about with retreating, is you're stuck. I mean, you're just basically you're stuck until you get enough armor peeled off that you go into force withdrawal. Now, there's this rule that we have. Kevin, you touched on this: auto ejection and abandoning units. So pilot or crew is going to abandon the vehicle or the mech if they're in force withdrawal and permanently immobilized, right? Permanently having 0 movement, not from heat or any of this other nonsense, like done, like permanently, right? You've taken enough motive hits that your movement's been halved, or if you're a vehicle, right? Whatever, MP hits, whatever they're called, right? If you're immobilized and you're in force withdrawal, you're out. That's when the crew abandons. That's when the pilot ejects. And in that case, the unit is considered destroyed. If you get kill points for that, you get the objective points, and that's it. For example, I think this happened in one of the tactical reports. I was able to immobilize an LRM carrier and did enough damage for the crew to abandon. So that thing is just sitting pretty, and that's salvage, right? And we'll talk about salvage in a little bit. The other important thing I want to bring up about force withdrawal, Kevin, and this was always a problem in Classic too, is that the force withdrawal rules state you have to move closer to your table edge. It doesn't tell you how far. So in Classic, we've always played 1 inch. As long as you move 1 inch or 1 hex, you've satisfied it. We found that in Alpha Strike, and in fact, we may amend this in Classic, it's sort of ridiculous.
Right.
It can take a really long time. Your unit's still in the fight. It's not like they're really making. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just saying, most times you're taking just that 1 inch,
Right,
and you're continuing to fire. Right, you're not truly retreating, and it sort of defeats the purpose of the rule.
I
So
agree.
right, we decided basically half your movement, right? Half your movement profile has to be spent in the direction of the home edge, in a that the most optimal or reasonable line towards that edge, assuming there's intervening terrain or things like that, or maybe it's a lower movement cost, right? You can't willingly take like the path uphill or through rough terrain just so you can also slowly go. So like, the whole idea is spend half of that movement, and then you can spend the rest in doing maneuvers or other things that you might want to do, like turning your torso or turning back to fire, which is reasonable to a degree, but really we wanted to have more of that, take away some of that gaminess that can be done by just moving a single inch.
But moving on. So that's force withdrawal, retreating. auto ejection. The only other thing here to talk about is automatic mission termination. Everything is on a timer. Every single mission, I think most of them are 10 turns. There might be a couple that go beyond 10. We played a lot of games of Alpha Strike, a lot of games of Classic. Our turn limiter, I mean, most of our games go 8 to 9 turns, and
right.
Really
someone's
by turn
usually retreating by that point, or just declaring their withdrawal.
Right. We've had a couple ones, come down to the wire and go further. But I think what this does is this incentivizes players to get into the objectives, score points early, take big risks, play the game, rather than, let's, camp the edge of the map.
Run our Savannah Masters across the perimeter. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And hope for those lucky shots, for 12 turns before you finally close in. The sort of the meta, or the narrative behind that idea is you've got a window to complete this mission, before the artillery lines up, before airspace comes in to strafe the area or cluster bomb your forces. You can't just be willy-nilly wandering around the the valleys of some planet, looking to engage the opponent. Like, you guys have a limited time to complete this mission. You got to get in, you got to get out, right? I mean, it's very military. So that was sort of the thought behind this, right?
And to go along with that, right, wherever your units are at that point, it just terminates, right? So even we might be in the thick of a fight at that 10th round, whether or not it's a draw or one of us are winning, you just assume both forces are being, it's becoming nighttime, whatever. It's their window is closed. They're pulling from the field even with a victory.
The word of Blake, nuclear bomb is dropping. Everyone's like.
So it's it's pretty much the damage sustained at that point holds, but if you have individuals that are in retreat or still healthy, they sort of withdraw from the field as they are at that point on both sides. Right. And you just look at what's been destroyed on the field to determine, salvage and things like that per the salvage rules we'll get into.
Yep. Yeah, well, good segue, because that is up next. So salvage, how does that work? Well, salvage is obviously a critical part of BattleTech, right? It sets, I think, BattleTech as a war game apart from War Machine, Warhammer, every War, whatever, any of the other war games. BattleTech is the only one I think I'm aware of that has salvage in it. It's a very cool idea. Yeah. And so we wanted to incorporate it into the game and have it be tangible without being overwhelming. So how does it work? Well, basically, when a unit dies, when a unit's destroyed, abandoned, whatever, you don't mark off anything. You just leave the card as is. You turn it face down. At the end of the battle, depending on what's left on the unit, you get a certain amount of SP, support points, right, that go into your pool. Sometimes you can salvage a whole chassis, right? So if you guys are familiar with the critical hit table, you can roll a 12, which is not an ammunition explosion, just says killed on a battle mech. Well, what does that mean? Well, you blew the cockpit out, right? Something lucky happened, and that mech is just sitting there waiting to be claimed by the victor. Whoever the victor is gets the spoils of war, right? So even if, if Kevin headshots my mech, but I win the mission or he withdraws, like, I claim that mech as salvage. It's still my mech, right? So
pilot's dead, you'll have to replace him, but hey,
he's toast.
Mechs are expensive, pilots aren't.
that is I believe the tagline. So basically, when a vehicle, so first things first, infantry, battle armor, they never count. You cannot salvage and Frankenstein infantry back together.
Although, interestingly, for clan invasion, maybe we should, some bondsmen.
Oh, goodness gracious. So salvaging spare parts and everything else. So if a vehicle or a mech is reduced to 0 remaining structure or is destroyed via an ammo critical hit, the victor can still salvage some parts from that chassis. In the case of a draw, it's important to note each force salvages their own units. So it's like the salvage trucks just kind of come onto the field and awkwardly look at each other. Hey guys, and they just like drag their own mechs off the field. But there's this whole formula basically that talks about how you determine what you get. So basically, it's a factor of the unit size, the TMM, what's left of it, right? So as the TMM reduces, right, via motive criticals and not heat, but MP criticals, things like that. The armor that's left, right? Because again, you can get a through armor critical and roll a 12 and blow the cockpit out and still have, almost all the armor left, right? How much armor is left? How much structure is left? What's the highest weapon value remaining? So you have short, medium, long, extreme if you play with the optional suite of DFA rules. What's the highest number, right? That factors into it. Has the engine been damaged? If not, you get some extra SP there, right? Because you can salvage valuable pieces from the engine. And then another one if the unit has suffered no fire control hits. So that's basically like you're salvaging sensors or actuators or whatever it might be, right? So there's an example here. It walks through the whole thing. Now, in the case of an ammo explosion, if the unit is destroyed via an ammo explosion and does not have case or case 2, because remember, if it's destroyed and it's got case, it only took a point of damage. It's not a catastrophic explosion. But if it's destroyed by an ammo explosion and those things are not there, you only gain the unit's size and support points. That's basically like you're just collecting like charred
Scrap
pieces.
armor.
Yeah, just scrap armor, right? Case units are salvaged normally. Now, again, we talked about if the pilot is forced to eject, the crew abandons the vehicle, the unit suffered enough engine criticals to destroy the unit, right? But there's still structure or armor remaining. You roll that 12 on the crit chart or whatever unit destroyed or crew killed. I think it might be 11 for vehicles, actually. You can just grab that whole thing and you add that unit, not the support points, but you take that whole unit and you add it to your force. And so that's pretty cool, right? There's nothing more sweet than when you ask your buddy to use his models in your force.
Yeah, this always ends up being like something that occurs once, and when it does, it's even
So
when you're
good.
on the losing side, it's like it's pretty cool. It's
Right.
pretty funny to see your own model come at you, and there's things we put in there, right? You don't have to, right? Even if you get my whole unit, we have cash out options in the support points.
Right.
We also have, the model we set up for spending support points, it's most likely it's going to be an expensive repair, right? Usually some of the things that are, whether it got cored at the engine level, it's going to be an expensive repair, but still sometimes it's worth it just for the humiliation factor, you know?
Just for the humiliation factor. It's so true. Um, One other point of note, aerospace fighters. So you cannot ever salvage aerospace fighters whole. Unless they were somehow grounded if you're playing with those optional rules, like they landed or whatever. But I mean, because when they get blown up, they're like,
Right.
you're just getting what you get out of them.
Sully's not around in this century.
Oh my goodness, awful. Tom Hanks is definitely coming after us. So salvage options, Kevin, you just hit on this, right? So you
Yeah.
can basically cash stuff in if you don't want to face the burden of repair. You can basically just cash that in for support points.
Right. Your own units or the ones you salvage. So even your own, right? If it's so badly damaged after a battle that you don't want to spend the
Right.
money to repair it, it may be more cost effective to just cash out on the salvage and get spare parts.
So sad when that happens. So downtime. Speaking of repair, downtime is where all the action happens in between your games of Alpha Strike. So we'll email Kevin and I'll email each other back. This is what I spent. This is what I did. Right. Typically, so downtime happens after the next mission has been selected by the victorious force. This is important. So Kevin wins the mission. He decides he's going to pick, battle lines at high escalation for the next, that gives me insight into what I may or may not need. I may make decisions on what to repair or not repair based on that mission. Here's why. Kevin touched on this earlier. Certain things will keep the mech inoperable for an entire mission. So any unit that undergoes repairs beyond just armor and non-critical motive hits. That's like when a vehicle, when you hit a vehicle, you roll on the motive hit table, right? They're non-critical motives, not the MP hits when you actually roll the critical, right? They're different things. Anything that goes under repairs beyond those two things, it's not available for the next track. So that means you have to wait a whole game before you can use those. So, game 1, Kevin, damages the engine on my Zeus. I decide I'm going to repair it, right? It's not available for mission 2. It'll be ready for mission 3, right?
Yep.
So that is, again, the important thing of when you build your force, having some, padding in there. So if a couple units are out of commission, you can kind of backfill. So all of this stuff is sort of really cool when you're managing your, your roster of forces.
Yeah. And I think the important reason we do that right after the mission is chosen is that way the opponent can't use that knowledge, that meta knowledge, to select the next mission, knowing, oh, he's repairing his Zeus and these other heavies. I'm going to go with a heavy escalation, knowing that they have no heavies to field. I mean, yes, you could argue that from the previous mission they could kind of glean that information out, but we think it's more fair to avoid that kind of metagaming, to just you declare the repairs after the mission's selected. That way the opponent can't specifically choose a mission that would put you at a severe disadvantage, just,
Right.
from the metagame perspective. It was the most fair option, knowing we have a lot of this transparency in the, downtime.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of notes here on repairing versus total destruction. We touched on this on salvage, but any unit that is reduced to 0 structure or takes an ammo hit can't be repaired, right? It's just gone. You can salvage it. But a unit that is where you roll the 12 on the critical hit, or the crew killed, or they take multiple engine hits and they're knocked out, that's not a total destruction. You can still repair that mech, right? So that's an important point to note, and that's all in the rules here, along with some examples and all the costs of what it would cost to repair a mech. And those costs are variable depending on how good the mech is, how big the mech is, how fast the mech is. So pretty exciting stuff. The other piece of this, Kev, which I know you love, is the pilot and crew management. So when a mech gets decapitated and the pilot meets their unfortunate end, you can in fact hire new pilots. Now, per the rules, the pilots come in at skill 4. No exception. So you can't, bring a mech, like you can't take, and that's intentional, guys. And you may be like, oh, well, we want to change that. Well, here's why I would not recommend that. You go, you bring your Atlas in at skill 5 and you decide, well, I'm going to just spend the support points to hire a skill 2 pilot. Now you have this like jacked up Atlas that's really good. You don't want to get in those scenarios. So
Right.
the pilot comes in at regular skill level. That's skill 4, right? And it is what it is. New pilots are instantly added to the roster. They're permanent. They can be added up to any point when the players are assigning units to a mission. Now,
I'll add a note there that just, even though it's typically going to be used to replace a dead pilot, right, or a crew that's been killed, it can be used to downgrade a pilot. So, right, you can come up with your own narrative, like the pilot of the Zeus was dishonorable, coward, whatever, right? And in order to fit maybe a critical mission where you need to fit that PV, you may decide to replace that pilot, but you have to replace them with the sort of base level skill that we set, which is 4. So that way it's downgrading. They're significantly weaker than they were before, but the reverse was really what we tried to avoid, where you could significantly upgrade a unit where the whole match, the whole campaign was balanced on PV. Now you've just significantly given them a boost for a different part of the meta, which is our support points, and really not how it was intended. But this helps you kind of get that flexibility where, like, listen, all I have left is all my elite pilots, and I really want to fit this mission with something to bring to the table. You can kind of downgrade, and maybe you can just come up with a narrative that they were hurt or whatever, and like one of your standby pilots had to fill in. So I think there's plenty of more narrative support for bringing in that regular or that green level pilot versus the more elite pilots.
Right. Yeah, and in Alpha Strike, I think the benefit you'll find is oftentimes, like, you're not, unless you have a very elite pilot or you're just a couple of points off, you're probably not going to need to do that a lot. However, remember, if you decide to make that choice, that's it. That's permanent. You lose that elite pilot, that skill 2 guy, he's gone forever. for the rest of the campaign. So it's a, it's like a do or die type of thing, or if you salvage a unit and you just need to put a new pilot in it. So,
Right. No injured pilots. They're down
right.
and out. They're
That's it.
dead or
They're done.
fired,
They're fired.
court-martialed, whatever you want to call it.
So the last bit for repairing is infantry. So they just follow the same rules for repair and total destruction. Because again, they have no criticals. So you're either repairing them or they're dead. They're pretty simple to manage, which is exciting. All right, so the last section in the campaign is force management. So sometimes forces get depleted, you lose too many mechs, you lose the wrong mech. And so the campaign system offers the players a couple of options that he or she may exercise to help reinforce. The first one is purchases. The second one is mercenary hires. So in purchases, basically, Kevin, what you can do is you can go out to the black market, perhaps rifle through your old drop ships that are in orbit.
The force, your faction requisition store, your spend some points.
Exactly. You basically take support points, you spend them, and you buy a mech. And it's very simple. It's the adjusted point value of the mech, 1-to-1. So, for example, if I have a skill 4 Wolverine, it costs 30 points. 30 PV, it's going to cost 30 support points. Now, it does take a full mission before that mech is available. So, for example, it's the end of mission 1. You've killed my favorite Wolverine, and I want to buy a new one. It's going to take me a whole mission. So I won't be able to use it in mission 2, but it will be ready for mission 3. So that's kind of
same way you declare the repairs you're making, you declare these purchases that you're making in that downtime right before the next mission.
Exactly.
Right, like you said, it takes one full mission for that requisition to come through. Whether you're bringing someone from the back lines or you're waiting for that pilot to move, on planet, whatever it might be, right? That's sort of the drawback or sort of the counterweight to abusing the purchases for making like an immediate escalation that the other person wasn't prepared for.
Right.
We set some restrictions in there though, right? So the adjusted PV, so it's that pilot that you include with that purchase is also locked in for the rest of the campaign, just like your other starting forces. And we said, again, this is our tips. Try to stay within a band of pilot skills. We do the typical 3 to 5. That way you can't bring in someone that's like a skill 2. You're not hiring like some elite pilot that was just sort of waiting off planet.
Some legendary dude, yeah.
Call me in, coach.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, and this is not just battle mechs. You can hire infantry, fighters, VTOLs, tanks, whatever you need. Basically, it just
and
takes
for anyone that
filter.
doesn't want to do the math, this is on average. I would say 90% of the time, the purchases will be more expensive than doing like a full repair on an equivalent chassis. So it's definitely an expensive option. It's sort of like the break the glass in case of emergency option, right? It's like you're really in a bad position where maybe you're missing all of your lights or you don't have no heavies to counteract the opponent's force. They have them, so you want to have one just in case. That's kind of where you use the purchases, is where you have a gap in your force that you need to fill.
Yeah, like when Kevin fields all Savannah Masters and I need that Arrow 4 system to take them.
I was going to give the counter argument when you bring artillery and I have none.
So what if we need instant gratification? What do we do then? Well, there is the option to hire mercenaries. Now, Kevin and I went over, very, very with a fine-tooth comb, what should be, the sort of the feel of mercenaries. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have played MechWarrior 5 or, remember the glory that was MechWarrior 2 or MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries, where, you had to manage the force, right? You were on the hook for the repair bill. You couldn't just sort of throw your mechs to the wind. There was sort of a meta aspect of managing your force. We wanted to kind of bring that to the campaign. So a couple of things. Number one, mercenaries, they cost half the adjusted point value. So same thing. If I'm buying that Wolverine at skill 4 as a purchase, it's 30. If I'm as a mercenary hire, it's only 15. They're half as much out of the gate. Now,
half as much compared to the purchase, but the actual hiring is equal to their adjusted PV.
Right. Right.
Or do I have that wrong?
Well, you mean the point value doesn't change. Just what you spend in SP is half initially. However,
Sorry, you
the,
may have to edit that out. I'm still looking at the old version on
oh,
the share. That's why I'm off. I hope I
no,
didn't
no
say
problem.
×2 earlier for purchases.
You did not.
All right. Sorry. Do you mind if we just reboot the hire real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
Or just we can jump in at the cost?
Yeah, we can jump
Probably.
into costs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had some nice stuff at the beginning there.
Yeah. So the other thing about mercenaries, right? Yeah. So you've got that basically you do the normal adjusted PB cost. The SP cost is half of that. So again, the Wolverine at skill 4 costs 30 PB. You pay 15 SP to get it on your force. It's there immediately. So if you hire them at the end of mission 1, they're there for mission 2. That's sort of the key differentiator for mercenaries. The other thing is you are on the hook for their repair bill. So they need to be repaired in full. So mercenaries are a little bit of a gamble. If you play them recklessly, they could end up costing as much as a purchase. If you play them wisely, you could get away with a pretty good bill there. So,
and you only get them for that one mission. So
right, great
you
point.
can't go in saying, "Oh well, it cost me what I would have paid for a purchase," because the advantage still to the purchases, they become a permanent part of your force. You can use them. You'll probably get one more use out of them, which will make them a lot more cost effective than just blowing through a mercenary, paying that full cost and not getting it past one mission.
Yeah. And what we've seen in our campaigns and also some of our collaborators like Ion Radio, they have a campaign out, and a few of you guys have played through campaigns with the sort of beta release rules. Purchases almost always happen after mission 1. Because once you get the mission 2 and mission 3, like the delay in getting that, that logistics set up to get that unit on the planet, it's too long. So you're just going to hire mercenaries, right? Well, if you're in mission 3 and you're hoping that you're going to get a purchase and the game's going to go to mission 5, it's probably not. Just hire the mercenaries. So early game you're typically buying things, so it's a better investment, whereas later in the game you just need to pay for those mercenaries to get them on the planet. So purchases, mercenaries, to give you a couple different ways to add to your force. Neither of them are cheap, right? So we're talking like in our 235 ish, 250-ish point value games, you're talking about like a whole support pool of about 120, 125 points. So when you're talking about a 30-point Wolverine, I mean, you could basically field one medium lance of mercenaries for half of your whole support pool, and then you're on the hook for repairs. So these things are not cheap. They're not meant to basically, replace your force. They're there to supplement it in a very small part. But I think it just will help. Again, if you really need that one missing piece of the puzzle for a specific mission, you can do this. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and the skill level with mercenaries, we set that same bandwidth, right? We recommend stay within a controlled range 5 to 3 on skill, just so you're not allowing someone to bring a highly skilled or highly incompetent mercenary to like a unit like a Savannah Master or a transport, right, where you just want to get that unit on the field and you might try to abuse it by bringing like a skill 9, like,
right. Right. So it costs 4 points. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, we're usually in that 3 to 5 range, which is like regular to actually veteran to green, I think, by the fluff. Basically, that's the campaign rules in a nutshell. You figure out what kind of force you want to play with, size your mission, size your force, number of units, type of units. You pick it, you go through the missions, you battle, you have fun, and that's that, guys. Kevin, any closing thoughts, sir?
I don't.
None.
This is fun. Can't wait to do another campaign now that we're back in action.
I know, it feels so good. Yeah, I mean, so one of our subscribers, has been messaging me, and he's been running a lot of 4-on-4 mech battles with Alpha Strike, and I'm sort of interested to try that. I was talking to Tom about it. Like, you could probably get a 4-on-4 Alpha Strike in like 45 minutes, real quick, right? I mean, the long pole in that tent's probably setting up the terrain. But if you could do it real quick, 2 people setting up a board real quick, you could probably get You get 2 matches in a night, right? You can move through a campaign pretty quickly, which is
I doubt we'd get the
neat.
3, but 2 seems reasonable.
Right, definitely not. Definitely not the 3. Not with the rules lookups and Tom hatcheting you.
Sidebars.
Right, the
Yeah.
sidebars.
Random
Bam.
noises in the studio. And I think as we get more playtime in, for our viewers, they know we're playing a lot of the pre-invasion timeline with our units.
Right.
I think as we get into more of the invasion timeline, which obviously we've been reserving until we have the Kickstarter units in hand, so we can really launch with that full force. I
Yeah.
think we may adjust some of our recommended, sizes and unit strengths, force strengths to better suit with that, and we'll probably have amendments. So always check back. Look for updates on DFAWargaming.com. The suggestion I made earlier, we're often tweaking and adjusting these rules, looking for ways to update them. So I guess my closing comment would just be to stay, stay frosty, to keep an eye on what we're posting out there, because we're always updating, we're always releasing new stuff in these rules to kind of really enhance that campaign play, because that's really where it gets fun. It's one thing to play a match in a night and it's sort of over, but the narratives that continue week to week are really where we have a lot of fun. You don't have to do a lot of story writing, but it sort of sets the groundwork to just easily add a narrative layer, a story into that, because you kind of have all of the base work there, right? You're an attacker, I'm a defender, I'm now on the counter attack or whatever. And it's really cool. It's a really easy way to add more background to the match and really enjoy it.
I agree. I'm ready, Kevin, to do like a macro campaign where we have like 3 different campaigns in the same system on 3 different planets, and then we got to figure that out one of these days. We'll have like a big map,
multiple players, multiple teams, tag teams.
That would be pretty cool. That would be pretty cool. All right, well, guys, on that note, this wraps up our HyperPulse uplink. Our walkthrough of the DFA Alpha Strike campaign rules, our first release of that. So be sure to download that on our website. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Discord. Don't forget to listen to our soundtrack while you play through your Alpha Strike campaign. That's on iTunes and Amazon and Google Play and Napster and Spotify and all the streaming services out there. So don't forget to check that out. Of course, YouTube as well. But other than that, guys, that's all we got. So thank you so much for watching and or listening. We appreciate all your support. If you haven't subscribed, please do so already.
Stay safe out there, folks.
Yeah, guys, have a great night and stay tuned. Always great stuff coming from Death from Above Wargaming. Have a good night.
Good night.